Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters, your favorite midnight quilter, and in this video, we're going to be building a log cabin. Well, not an actual log cabin, obviously. We're building a log cabin quilt block. We're going to use strips of different sizes to create a curved effect and incorporate a little bit of stitch and flip to add even more wow to it. I've got my piecing potion in my snacks and my fabric, so let's get to it. Log cabin quilt blocks are just one of those block designs that are so timeless and classic, and you can see them in antique quilts all the way up to really cool modern quilts. And in this video, we're going to do a little bit of a scrappy variation using some of these beautiful fabrics. Now, I designed the pattern so I'd use strips of different colors to create a scrappy looking effect. So if you have plenty of scraps laying around, like who doesn't, you can totally use those. But for my quilt, I've chosen these beautiful, deep and rich purples and blues to create a stunning effect. First, I have my background fabric, which is this lovely kind of cream tonal. It's going to allow the prints to really shine. Then I have my accent fabric. This is the fabric that's going to be in the same place in every quilt block. Then for the sides of our block, I'm going to be using these beautiful prints. It has that kind of deep, kind of pinkish purple color with some pops of blue and beautiful textures. Not only are these fabrics really gonna look beautiful in our log cabin block, it's gonna give it that kind of scrappy effect. I've chosen these 6 prints to really show off my block. But if you're going with a scrappier look, you can use as many scraps as you have laying around. But if you wanna make the quilt just like I'm making here, or if you wanna get your hands on the quilt pattern, all you have to do is click the link in the description box below or visit quiltingismytherapy.com. Well, now that I have these all picked out and looking beautiful, it's time to start cutting them up. Log cabin quilt blocks are made up of strips that work around a center square. Those strips are what give the log cabin block its beautiful look. But even though it does mean a little bit more cutting up front, the result is so worth it. I'm actually making 2 versions of the block in this quilt. So I'm gonna have to cut out some strips in different widths. Then subcut those strips into the smaller pieces that are gonna make my block. I'm not one that's usually an organized cutter, but this time I'm definitely gonna keep track of which sizes are which. Then, after I've cut up the smaller strips, I'm gonna do the same with the wider ones. I need some longer ones that are gonna go around the outside of the block, all the way down to the smaller ones that are gonna be towards the center. Well, once I've cut up the background fabric into my various sizes, it's time to do the same with my prints. I'm making 2 versions of this block, so I'm gonna need some thinner strips out of each print and some wider strips. Once I've cut out the total number of strips I need from all the prints, it's time to subcut them into my smaller pieces. But since I want a nice scrappy look, I'm gonna make sure that I cut each one into some different sizes. What that means is I'm not gonna cut all of my 9.5-inch strips out of this one fabric. I wanna make sure there's a range. So I'm gonna take these and open them up, stack them on top of each other, and then cut them up into the pieces I need. It's just gonna ensure that I get a little bit more of a scrappy look. And then I'm gonna repeat with the different fabrics, creating my pieces in all those different sizes. And once that's finished, I'll show you how these blocks come together. First things first, I need to gather my materials for assembling my log cabin block. The good news is we don't need any permits for this kind of construction. Log cabins traditionally start with a center square with the pieces that build up around it. Think of these strips as the logs of our log cabin. And there's a lot of different ways that you can place those strips. For my block, I'm gonna put all the prints on one side and all the background fabric on the other. To give our block a little bit of a curvy look, we're using strips of 2 different sizes. Now for my blocks, I want that scrappy overall look, so I'm just kind of randomly picking out prints here. But you can definitely plan it out if you want a little bit more control over your fabric placement. Piecing log cabin blocks is pretty straightforward. We're gonna sew our 1/4-inch seam, press in between steps, and continue working around. The only little bitty, itty tiny little thing is that I have to make sure that my piecing is correct, because if any of these seams are off, it's gonna keep compounding as I'm assembling the block. So to make sure I can keep it somewhat precise, I have my 1/4-inch foot on my sewing machine, and I have my iron and my trimming mat ready to go. So starting from the center, I'm gonna take that background fabric, put it right size together with a square, and start piecing. Now usually if I was piecing a quilt like this where all the blocks are assembled the same, I would probably use a little bit more of an assembly line mentality, sewing all the first seams, pressing them all, and moving on. But I can't wait to show you what this block looks like, so I'm just jumping in with the first one. So there's my first segment sewn and pressed, and I'm gonna keep going adding those pieces. So here I have the first segment sewn on with those background strips, and I'm gonna start working on the other side of that square with my print strips. Of course, one of the most important things to do when you're assembling a log cabin quilt block is to make sure you have your snacks and your piecing potion handy. It just makes everything go a little bit smoother. So I have my first section sewn together, and I can continue on sewing my strips around it. But I want to make sure my blocks are pieced as perfectly as possible, so I'm going to pause here and trim that section before I move on. Trimming it now means that as I'm adding my next pieces, it's going to go together so much easier. Positioning my ruler on the block, trimming along two sides, rotating it, and then repeating on the other side. This is where you find out how good of a job you're doing piecing. And now that that's squared away, I'm going to sew on my next pieces. Another necessary step to perfectly pieced log cabin blocks is pressing the seams in between each step. And since I'm taking all the time to make sure it's pieced perfectly, I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of starch. I like how it makes them lay nice and flat. The trick here though is to not forget which side of the block you're working on. Now normally I would continue on with the next part of my block, but I'm going to pause here and add a little bit of stitch and flip to add some extra interest to our block. I'm going to grab a square of background fabric and a square of print fabric and draw a line from corner to corner on the back of it. These are actually going to go in the corners of the blocks. So my print square is going to go in this corner so that the diagonal line is running like this. And the background square is going to go on the opposite side. Once I have those in place, I'm going to sew on the line and then trim a 1/4 inch away from the seam. This stitch and flip is going to put a little pop of contrasting color in each of the corners and look amazing when the whole block is put together. If this step seems like a little too extra for you, you can totally leave it out. You'll still have that same beautiful log cabin block, it just won't have those pops of colors in the corner. A quick press, and then it's back to sewing on the strips. So I pressed it, I've trimmed it, and I'm ready to add my last row of strips. It's kind of like we're building a cozy log cabin fort. Just 2 more strips, and this block will be finished. So I'm going to sew these on real quick, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's all assembled. And once I'm finished, I have a gorgeous block that looks like this, with the background strips on one side and the assorted prints on the other, giving it that beautiful scrappy look. I'm making 2 versions of this block, one like this, and one that's basically a mirror image. On this one, the background fabric strips are skinnier, and the print strips are wider. Plus, I've also switched around the square that I stitched and flipped. It's still just kind of amazing to me that the fabric placement and the style of block can really give it a different look. Now that I have this finished, I'm going to repeat that, making a bunch of different blocks with different fabric placements. Now when it comes to making log cabin quilts, you can lay out your blocks in so many different ways. You could arrange the blocks so that the fabrics make diagonal strips like this. Such a cool kind of secondary design that can go over the whole quilt. Or you can change up the arrangement of the blocks so that they're grouped together like this, where the fabrics come together to make a different secondary pattern. And if you wanted to, you could totally come up with your own layout, but I have a different layout in mind for our quilt. First, I'm going to grab 4 of those log cabin blocks and add a little bit of something extra to them. For these blocks, I grabbed 4 of the log cabin blocks and did a little stitch and flip in those corners. I did it the exact same way as I did those smaller triangles, because they're going to come together like this and form the center of our block. Well, not the true center. Our layout's going to be a little offset, but this is where all the other blocks are going to grow off of. So to finish out these rows, I'm going to add a couple more blocks on each side. And I'm paying very close attention to the fabric placement. There's a secondary pattern that's going to be going on here, and I want to make sure that I don't mess that up. Once I have the blocks all laid out, it's time to sew them together. And I'm going to do that by sewing the blocks into rows and then sewing those rows together. And the first section of my quilt is assembled, and we're starting to see a little bit of that secondary pattern begin to come out. And even though these 4 blocks are kind of the center of the quilt, it's actually off center a bit. So in this section, I have 1 block on this side, but several other blocks on the other. Basically in this section, I want to see the background part of the block come together to make that kind of pointy look. And the great thing about this is as I'm piecing these blocks together, there's not a lot of points that have to match. A lot of the areas where these blocks come together are the same fabric, so even if that point isn't perfect, you're not even going to be able to notice. Now let's check out the top section of the quilt. And to make this section, I did the same exact thing. Laid out all my blocks, made sure they were going in the right direction, and then sewed those blocks together in rows, and then sewed the rows together. And let me tell you, as you're laying out your blocks, you want to have your pattern close by to make sure you're laying out all those blocks correctly. But when you do it the right way, you get a cool secondary pattern coming together right here. And this quilt is going to be nice and big, so I also have a bottom section. Again, same idea, laying out those blocks, creating that secondary pattern. So now that I have those 3 main sections complete, I'm only 2 seams away from a finished quilt top. So let me lay this out and get it sewn together. And this quilt top is finished. I love that even though it's the same block over and over again, that scrappy fabric placement as well as that secondary pattern gives it a really cool look. It's like one of those quilts that look a lot harder than it actually is. Now obviously I went with a scrappy kind of look because I wanted a bunch of different prints in here. But if you wanted it a little bit more regulated, you could definitely plan out that fabric placement before you sew it together. Plus I love how a little bit of stitch and flip adds a pop of color in those background areas. And I still think it's kind of crazy that using 2 different widths of fabric will give you a curvy kind of look without the curved piecing. And if you're getting a little bit of log cabin fever, you can definitely get the pattern or the kit on our website. All you have to do is click the link in the description box below. Now, all that's left to do is to get it quilted. Now, normally I love machine quilting my own quilts, but this time I'm gonna take it to the shop and have a machine quilt it for me. There's just something kind of nice about taking in a quilt top and then coming back later and picking up that finished quilt. For the backing fabric, I've chosen this beautiful gray print. I love how the gray is going to complement the fabrics on the other side of the quilt and give it that beautiful look. So I'm going to take my backing fabric and my quilt top and take it over to the shop to get it quilted, and then I'll show you what it looks like. And presto, just like that, my quilt top is finished. I have to say, I just love this part of making a quilt when it's all complete and now it's time to enjoy it. And what I really love about the pattern is that you can customize it based on your preferences. Go all out scrappy with a ton of different prints, or control the placement of your strips a little bit more for a more unified look. Either way, it's gonna look amazing. Now in an upcoming video, I'm gonna give you some tips for machine quilting your log cabin blocks. You know, just in case you wanna finish the quilt yourself. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.